knowing her location or who took her from her house, you have two options right now. Call the Pima County Sheriff at 520-351-429 or the FBI at 1-800-CALL-FBI. $1 million cash, anonymous, no questions asked. The family promised it, and they have the bank to back it. It takes just one tip, one brave soul deciding that the truth is worth more than their silence. That masked figure caught on the doorbell cam remains a ghost to this day. The lab is still running that mixed DNA from the house and crunching the tower pings. Feds are working out of the Tucson branch this very second, chasing leads kept from the press, and the sheriff claims they are gaining ground. Forensics are churning, and somewhere in or around Tucson, a person is walking around knowing the truth of those 41 minutes. 7 clues, 5 mysteries, and 1 woman who deserves to be found. We aren't done here. Hit that subscribe button and ring the bell, because when that DNA hits, when the cell data is fully mapped, or the next big crack in the case appears, you will hear it here first, with the same rigorous fact-checking that guided you through this 10-part series. We don't do rumors dressed up as facts or drama instead of proof. Just the raw truth until we get closure. Nancy is out there, and the answers are on the way. The garage shut tight at 9:50 at night, marking the final second Nancy Guthrie was known to be alive. Come 2:28 in the morning, she had vanished without a single scream, witness, or broken lock. All that remained was a masked intruder who marched right up to the doorbell cam and shut it down like a pro. This video isn't about confirmed facts, it's about the massive disconnect between official narratives and the hard evidence. Even after the sheriff cleared the family, the vehicle Tommaso Cioni used to drop Nancy off remained impounded for weeks, undergoing tests. An investigative reporter with 35 years of experience cited a high-ranking officer who never stopped viewing him as a top suspect. The suspicion lingered because someone systematically took out multiple cameras that night, clearly knowing the home's layout inside and out. Tommaso Cioni stands as the final confirmed individual to lay eyes on Nancy Guthrie while she was still breathing. He stuck around until she entered the house and watched the garage door slide all the way down. During the 41 minutes leading up to her abduction, events unfolded that authorities still haven't properly clarified. Detectives spent 3 hours tossing his house and seizing evidence, only to clear him 6 days later despite promising to keep digging. Officials haven't explained the crucial difference between a direct forensic comparison and a generic database hit regarding the DNA evidence. Federal agents released a suspect description vague enough to fit millions, yet never clarified if it ruled Cioni in or out. We have 7 specific points that are fully documented and sitting right there in the open public files. Every single one remains an open question, so we are going to break them down individually with proof to back it all up. When this video wraps, you'll see precisely why the official story doesn't sit right with so many people. You'll get why the doubts persist. And if you're new, know that we handle true crime with a strict code of ethics. We don't pretend guesses or facts or swap real evidence for drama. Everything here is sourced from police briefing. Our content relies on court docs, federal releases, and vetted journalism because our job is to analyze, not preach. If you value accuracy, hit subscribe and ring the bell so you catch the latest updates on this case immediately. Let's rewind to the start, because you have to grasp the timeline to see why these 7 points are huge. You need the full rundown of what went down between the night of January 31st and the morning of February 1st, 2026. The entire mystery hinges on a specific 41-minute window that you simply have to understand. It was Saturday night in the Catalina foothills, a wealthy and silent patch of desert located just north of Tucson. Homes there are spaced wide apart with cacti lining the streets, meaning neighbors rarely hear a thing even when trouble strikes. 84-year-old Nancy Guthrie got to her daughter Annie's place at 5:32 for a totally normal family dinner. It was one of those standard nights that nobody thinks twice about until tragedy hits, right around 9:48. Nancy's son-in-law, Tommaso Cioni, gave her a ride home and made sure she got safely through the front door. At 9:50, the garage door shut and Cioni left, marking the final verified proof that Nancy was alive and well. From that point on, we have to piece together the story using digital clues. Starting at 1:47 in the morning, someone deliberately killed the front doorbell camera. It didn't just glitch out, and then came 2:12. A sensor at the house picked up movement, signaling that someone was definitely lurking on the grounds. Since Nancy didn't have a paid subscription, the device failed to record any footage before 2:28 arrived. Her pacemaker, which usually syncs nonstop with her phone, suddenly went dark and stopped transmitting data entirely. Detectives pinpointed that 41-minute span between 1:47 and 2:28 as the critical abduction timeframe. You have exactly 41 minutes from the camera cutting out to the moment her heart monitor went silent. During that brief slot, a frail 84-year-old dependent on meds was snatched from her own house. An intruder arrived fully prepped with a mask, gloves, a backpack, and a gun. Knowing exactly where to find the cameras, this individual executed what the Pima County Sheriff's Department later officially labeled a kidnapping. You have to wonder how a stranger could possibly know the exact camera locations on a house they'd never visited. How could anyone navigate a dark home, kill the security, and vanish without alerting the neighbors unless they knew the layout? That level of precision isn't luck or guessing, it's specific knowledge, and that info always comes from somewhere. Detectives aren't stupid, which is why they didn't look for strangers in the days following Nancy's disappearance. They zeroed in on the family, focusing hard on the one person who was there just hours before everything went down. In the aftermath, the Pima County Sheriff's Department was flooded with nearly 18,000 tips and calls. Specialists flew in straight from Quantico, including top-tier analysts, digital experts, and hostage negotiators joined the fray, while the Bureau's director personally weighed in on the matter. K-9 units worked alongside drones and choppers equipped with heat-seeking gear to scour the Badlands, proving this was far from standard procedure. Such a massive reaction mirrored the grim reality the clues were hinting at, and amidst the chaos, a specific name floated to the surface. This didn't come from online gossip or random guessing, but straight from a high-ranking officer with verified eyes on the case files. That insider spoke to a reporter boasting 36 years at major networks like CNN and Court TV. And the name dropped was Tommaso Tioni. By February 16th, the sheriff had officially exonerated him and the whole family, a move that remains on the public record. That decision stands, and we will cover it thoroughly since fairness dictates that every angle of this story gets its day in court. However, things didn't just go back to normal after that announcement. The vehicle stayed gone for weeks, and the leaker never took back their words. Crucial inquiries regarding the physical evidence remained completely unresolved. The gap between the press release and the actual files never closed, leaving us with 7 oddities that might seem fine on their own. Taken together, they create a disturbing picture that authorities haven't touched, which is exactly the reason we are digging into this today. Stick around, as our first point begins right where the mystery began, with the garage door shutting tight at 9:50 in the evening. This kicked off a 41-minute time frame that still lacks a solid explanation. To truly grasp what was lost on the night of February 1st, 2026, you have to know Nancy Guthrie beyond the breaking news banners or police file numbers. You must see her as a woman who spent 84 years building a meaningful existence deeply anchored in a single community. Born Nancy Ellen Long on January 27th, 1942, she hailed from Fort Wright, Kentucky, a little town sitting right across the river from Cincinnati. After earning her degree at the University of Kentucky, she tied the knot with Charles Errol Guthrie in December of 1963. The couple spent their early days trotting the globe for his job, as Charles made his living as a mining engineer. His career path eventually led them down under to Melbourne, Australia, where they welcomed their last child, Savannah, in December of 1971. When the baby was just 2 years old, the clan returned to the States and put down roots in Tucson, Arizona, over 50 years back. Nancy stayed put, crafting a full life in the desert while raising 3 kids and becoming the undeniable heart and soul of her household. Her son Cameron rose to the rank of colonel, serving as a distinguished pilot who flew F-16s for 26 years with the Vermont Air National Guard. Savannah graduated with honors from the University of Arizona before ascending to become a titan in the world of American broadcast news. She has co-anchored NBC's Today Show since 2012, while her sister Annie pursued the arts as a poet, jeweler, and teacher. Annie authored a collection of poems and previously led marketing efforts at the University of Arizona Poetry Center. She married Tommaso Cioni, an Italian native and AP biology instructor who has called Tucson his home and workplace for over 15 years. These three successful siblings were molded by the matriarch who held them together, though that bond was tested severely in 1988. Charles Guthrie passed away suddenly from a heart attack at just 49 years old while working on a mining project down in Mexico. With Savannah only 16, the family was devastated, forcing Nancy to pivot from full-time homemaker back into the workforce. She accepted a PR role at the University of Arizona specifically to ensure Savannah and Annie could get their degrees without paying tuition. For 17 years, from 1990 to 2007, she clocked in every day, not out of corporate greed, but out of necessity. She did it to pave the way for her children. And Savannah later described her mom as the foundation that kept them standing after their father was gone. She thanked Nancy for pushing her toward journalism, a single choice that launched her entire career. This is the lady we are talking about who had turned 84 by the time 2026 rolled around. She resided by herself in the Catalina foothills, a rugged patch of desert terrain sitting just north of the Tucson city limits. The area is famous for its stunning mountain vistas and a level of silence you simply don't find in the urban sprawl. Houses sit on sprawling lots larger than an acre, hidden by cactus and brush, making the neighborhood pitch black and silent after sunset. Nancy spoke about it on the Today Show in November of 2025, only 3 months prior to vanishing, calling the city absolutely wonderful. She praised the easygoing lifestyle and chuckled about watching the javelinas munch on the greenery in her garden. While her mind was razor sharp and she stayed busy with church, her body was beginning to slow down. Detectives verified right away that she had trouble moving around and needed her meds every single day. She also depended on a pacemaker that synced with her phone, meaning she wasn't someone capable of just walking off into the desert alone. The authorities made that point crystal clear in their report. They ruled out her walking away on her own within hours of arriving, as everything the deputies found inside the house pointed to a much darker conclusion. Hey, where are you tuning in from right now? Go ahead and drop your city name down in the comments. This mystery has grabbed headlines all over the globe, and keeping the spotlight on it keeps the pressure on the detectives to find answers. Nancy never missed her virtual church service on Sunday mornings, but on the morning of February 1st, 2026, she was a no-show. A member of her prayer group noticed she wasn't online and immediately reached out to her family. That single call set the whole investigation in motion. What the officers discovered when they pulled up to her home in the Catalina foothills would completely transform this case from a simple welfare check to a full-blown federal kidnapping investigation before sunset. Just like that, a woman who had spent 84 years raising a family, supporting her community, and guiding 3 amazing children was gone. Then there was a critical 41-minute gap, a timeline ticking away in the dark long before anyone even knew they should be looking for her. It was Sunday morning, February 1st, 2026. Tucson is still chilly at that hour, with the desert air holding that specific quiet you find in the Sonoran morning before the heat takes over. Under normal circumstances, it is the kind of morning Nancy Guthrie would have spent sitting exactly where she was supposed to be. She should have been in front of a screen, streaming the service with a close-knit group of friends who met online every single week without fail. However, on that particular morning, her screen remained dark. The call never came through. The connection never opened. So her friends waited a while, then they reached out, and finally, they called her family. At 12:15 p.m., deputies from the Pima County Sheriff's Department arrived at Nancy's house in the foothills for what was logged as a standard welfare check. That is the type of call that usually ends with a friendly knock at the door and an elderly resident answering in their bathrobe. But the second the first few deputies stepped across the threshold, everything changed. The nature of the call shifted instantly based on what they saw inside the residence, described in official reports as conditions that were, to use the department's own phrasing, very concerning and inconsistent with someone leaving voluntarily. Within just a few hours, that routine check evolved into a missing person investigation. The missing person case became a crime scene, and before the sun went down that Sunday, homicide detectives were called in to work alongside the search team. By then, the Pima County Sheriff's Department had already formally notified the FBI. Think about what that timeline implies, because homicide investigators do not typically respond to welfare check. They definitely do not respond to standard missing person reports. They only show up when the evidence at a scene is specific and serious enough to suggest that a life may have been taken. That is exactly what Nancy's home communicated on day one. Here is what the investigation has confirmed so far. Forensic evidence matching Nancy's biological profile was found near the front entrance, and lab testing later verified that the DNA definitely belonged to her. Deputies noted that essential personal belongings had been left behind inside the house. These were items that anyone planning to leave on their own would almost certainly have packed. Even her medications were still there. Her phone was left behind, and the doorbell camera at the front entrance had been physically ripped from its mount. It hadn't malfunctioned or been covered by weather, but was removed deliberately. The evidence found outside the home told a disturbing story of its own. Although investigators have declined to publicly share the details, the findings suggested something significant had occurred right at that entrance. Forensic expert Lou Giacalone spoke publicly about the initial response to the scene, raising a major red flag that has never been officially addressed. He stated that the number of people allowed to walk through the property in those critical first hours was totally inconsistent with standard evidence preservation rules. He referenced the need to immediately tape off not just the house, but the surrounding area as well. This is done to establish a controlled entry point so they can document every single person who crosses the perimeter. His assessment was blunt. He called the early management of the scene a significant procedural failure. That specific concern has never been publicly answered by the Pima County Sheriff's Department. This is a huge deal because in any forensic investigation, maintaining the integrity of the crime scene during the first few hours is everything. Evidence degrades, trace material gets contaminated very easily. A scene that has been accessed by too many people too quickly becomes harder to analyze and harder to prosecute. If the early management at Nancy's residence was compromised, that is a problem. Even if it was unintentional, that has direct implications for the quality of any forensic evidence they recovered from the house. Meanwhile, the digital infrastructure of the property was already painting a picture of what happened. The FBI's Operational Tech Division, the same unit that deployed the famous analyst from the Brian Kohberger case, arrived with heavy-duty cases full of video forensics gear. Investigators were later seen leaving the property carrying a diagram used to estimate human height. Sources indicated this was being used to cross-reference the physical size of the masked figure on the doorbell video against known measurements at the scene. On February 12th, exactly 11 days after NY vanished off the map, the Bureau put out an official suspect profile derived strictly from that grainy doorbell video, describing a male standing roughly 5'9" to 5'10". He had a medium build with a dark mustache peeking out from under his mask, carrying a black 25-liter Ozark Trail hiker pack featuring reflective safety straps. Analysts flagged the unusual placement of his weapon, which was holstered right near the center of his waistline. That same figure was caught on tape walking toward the lens and reaching out with a gloved hand to block the view. When that failed, he stepped off the porch and ripped up some shrubbery from the garden bed. He used the foliage to obscure the camera angle from below, and that specific chain of events reveals a lot. Swatting at a lens with your hand is just a gut reaction, but backing up to gather plant matter for cover is a calculated move. That constitutes a two-stage process where the second action is only taken because the first attempt didn't get the job done. He knew the device was still rolling, proving this wasn't just some crime of passion or impulse. The perpetrator clearly understood security tech and adjusted his strategy on the fly when his first try fell short. A specific piece of forensic evidence surfaced that Sheriff Nanos described as one of the most solid leads in the whole case. It was the backpack, specifically that 25-liter Ozark Trail model, which is a Walmart exclusive. And mere days after the profile dropped, detectives began scouring security tapes from Walmart stores all over Tucson and the neighboring areas. The retailer handed over sales logs for every single Ozark Trail hiker pack purchased at their locations in the months leading up to the crime. They tracked every sale, pinpointed every store, and identified every payment method used. That is a solid digital trail that is still being investigated, while the ransom demands started coming in right away. Several messages were fired off to news organizations like TMZ, KOLD News 13, and KGUN9, demanding $6 million in crypto. The kidnappers set two separate deadlines, both of which came and went with no money changing hands. A third message appeared later, citing a new type of digital currency, with TMZ reporting that it contained explicit threats described by police as graphic. The outlet immediately turned over every piece of correspondence to the FBI. While the sheriff's office verified they were treating the threats as credible, the actual author of those notes remains a mystery. Authorities have never clarified if the messages came from Nancy's abductor or just some sick opportunist watching the news. However, there is one fact that was established right from the very beginning. Clues found at the residence prove she was taken against her will, ruling out any accident, medical emergency, or decision to run away. An intruder approached that property in the dead of night, fully equipped and executing a specific strategy. They possessed enough inside knowledge to navigate the home in pitch blackness without triggering a single alert. Yet the question detectives posed in those initial hours is the exact same riddle this case circles back to every time. It isn't about who was capable of doing it, but who had the knowledge to pull it off. And as week one wrapped up, the investigation shifted gears, moving away from a wide dragnet and settling into a much narrower lane. It was the sort of lead that directs police away from the open desert and straight to a specific doorstep just miles away, armed with collection kits. There is a golden rule in detective work that simply isn't up for debate. It isn't just a formality. It is the bedrock of the job. You always start by clearing the last individual who saw the victim alive. You do this not because they are automatically guilty, but because simple logic dictates the process. You have to work outward from the facts, and the hard truth here starts with a garage door shutting at 9:50 p.m. on January 31st, 2026. As Tomas Oione drove his car out into the Tucson darkness, pause and consider that, because the timeline that follows is fact, not theory, yet it remains completely unresolved in the public eye. 50-year-old Tomas Oione is an Italian native who has called Tucson home for well over 15 years. He has spent a decade teaching 6th grade and AP biology at Bases Oro Valley, and according to everyone in his inner circle. He is a loyal husband and dedicated educator who was suddenly swept up in a massive national investigation surrounding a tragic event. To date, police have never arrested him or filed a single charge against him. The Pima County Sheriff officially cleared both him and the whole Guthrie family of any involvement on February 16th, 2026. That exoneration is on the official record, and we are going to unpack it thoroughly before we finish this story. However, we need to look at what the files confirm versus what they fail to explain. The Sheriff's Department verified that Oione was the last known person to see Nancy Guthrie alive after driving her home from dinner. He stayed put until she made it inside. He observed the garage door shut tight, then he drove off. 4 hours and 13 minutes down the line, the pacemaker ceased its descent. 4 hours and 13 minutes is quite a stretch of time, sufficient duration for anybody to construct a solid alibi, plenty of time for detectives to double check against cellular logs, security camera clips, or just a single trustworthy observer pinpointing a suspect's location between 1:47 a.m. and 2:28 a.m. Sheriff Nanos released his exoneration notice on February 16th. He made no mention of phone data placing Scion at a separate site throughout those 41 minutes. He failed to reference any video evidence from another address that would prove his whereabouts. He never brought forward a specific eyewitness. He simply put out a release, and that release declared the subject cleared. You see, the part left unsaid and untouched by officials ever since is how exactly Scion got ruled out for that particular time frame. What confirmed paper trail proved he was elsewhere the moment the camera feed cut out at 1:47 a.m. We have never been given that answer. Place that inquiry next to this second fact, because this is where the clash between police claims and the actual record gets too big to overlook. On February 16th, the very day the family was exonerated, the Pima County Sheriff's Department issued their definitive announcement. The automobile linked to Scion, the ride he used to fetch Nancy and drop her off that evening, sat in an evidence impound, not returned, not discharged, and still under active review. When reporters grilled Sheriff Nanos about the car during a media briefing, he chose his words with extreme caution. He characterized the seizure as standard police work. He claimed it aligned with crime scene rules mandated by court orders. He never stated the vehicle was released following the exoneration because that simply had not happened. Come February 26th, 10 whole days past the public dismissal of charges, crime reporter Brianna Whitney broke the news that the car remained in that forensic yard, still held, still being scrutinized. When the press pushed the Pima County Sheriff's Office for a reason, their answer was exact, yet revealing. The only thing they verified was that the machine remained a component of the ongoing inquiry. They did not claim the check was routine, nor that nothing important was found, just that it stayed within the case scope. Consider what that implies in the real world. Whenever detectives clear a relative and the car in question is just a minor item of proof, a random ride caught in standard procedures, it goes back fast since there is no legal grounds to keep it. The family is out of the woods. The vehicle offers zero value. Give it back. Tie up that loose end. Shift the manpower elsewhere. That is the normal way of doing things. That is how dismissed exhibits are treated. What breaks from the norm is keeping a car in a lab garage for weeks post-exoneration while telling the media it is still key to the open case. Those two claims cannot stand together without a cause. Either that machine contains something, a smudge, a thread, some biological marker that the experts are still trying to decode, or it links to a part of the probe that the dismissal failed to shut down completely. No one clarified either option to the public. Neither point has come up since then. There is a fact worth mentioning now that makes the puzzle even harder. On the evening of January 31st, Scion did more than just drop Nancy off and leave. According to the sheriff's verified schedule, he pulled the car right up to her house. He paused. He observed her entry. That automobile was sitting right there on Nancy Guthrie's land the very night she was taken from it. Perhaps the forensic crew is checking what debris from the lot might have jumped to the car, or if anything tied to that night's chaos left a mark inside. The analysis schedule adds up. What does not add up is the total lack of public answers once the suspect was cleared. Now, here is a piece of info that came in early March which shifts the vibe of the mystery without solving it. The car finally went back to Annie Guthrie. The police custody order expired. At first glance, that looks like closure, but handing back a vehicle after lab work is not the same as announcing results. Detectives do not usually release items and then broadcast what they discovered or missed. The ride was returned. Whatever those weeks of testing yielded, if anything at all, remains a secret. So, this is where the first fact and the second fact crash into one unanswered issue. The final individual, known to see Nancy Guthrie breathing, never had his excuse for that crucial 41-minute gap proven or explained to us. Plus, the machine he operated that evening sat for weeks in a police yard after he was let off, only to be given back later with zero context. The results of that analysis were never released. Just two hard truths. There are two glaring holes here, and neither one gets addressed in that official release. Every case comes down to a central mystery, a loose string that either breaks the case wide open or snaps tight. This time, that string ties back to 41 minutes of silence. It starts with a garage door, you see, plus a vehicle that remained locked in an impound lot way past the time the family was supposedly cleared. That barely scratches the surface because while detectives were busy sweeping that car, a whole different situation was unfolding on the other side of the city. It was a development that would march police right up to a front porch, clutching collection bags and holding their position for almost 3 hours. Let's look at February 3rd, 2026, exactly 3 days since Nancy Guthrie was taken from her residence. Reports claim the probe was moving at full speed with rescue squads scouring the desert terrain. You had FBI agents glued to monitors, the Pima County Sheriff handling the media circus, and over 10,000 leads already on the books. Police were sticking to one strict narrative in public: zero suspects, nobody on the radar, and total cooperation from the relatives. Then Ashley Banfield fired up her podcast, and she is certainly no rookie in this game, given her 36 years in broadcast news. From CNN to News Nation, she has reported on some of the most high-profile criminal sagas ever recorded in the States. Her reputation relies on getting the facts right, and on February 3rd, during her show Drop Dead Serious, She referenced a police contact she characterized as extremely well placed. This was someone with a spotless record and inside knowledge of the case, whom she has trusted for years. Anyway, this insider dropped two major bombshells. Number one, Annie Guthrie's car had definitely been hauled off, locked up, and processed as evidence. The tipster hinted at a link to Tommaso Cioni. And number two, they suggested he might actually be the main guy police were looking at. Banfield chose her words very carefully, making sure to add qualifiers like maybe to cover her bases. She admitted that relatives always get looked at first, stating clearly that these were just theories rather than hard proof. She was balancing on a tightrope, but she did it in the spotlight. And suddenly that name was out there for millions to judge. By the next morning, the Pima County Sheriff's Department fired back with a response. They told TMZ it was all nonsense, denying they had a suspect and refusing to confirm they seized any vehicle. They also made it very clear they had no idea where Banfield was getting her intel. Sheriff Nanos held a briefing on February 5th, calling the story irresponsible, though he did admit that no one had been officially cleared yet. He said it himself, plain as day, nobody has been ruled out. Yet he insisted just as strongly that they had no suspect and no person of interest at that moment, creating two stances that just don't match up. You have a veteran reporter with an insider on one hand and a sheriff making official denials on the other. People watching from their living rooms see the clash and figure one of these two has to be lying. But check out what went down over the next 4 days, because this is where it stops being a simple case of contradictory story. On February 7th, 2026, a week into the case, Savannah Guthrie stood with her siblings, Annie and Cameron, to post a video for their mom's captors. Their statement was calm and calculated, revealing they had actually gotten a message from someone. They announced they were willing to negotiate and prepared to pay up. That is the type of move FBI crisis units only approve when certain specific criteria have been met. It implies there is already an active line to the people responsible for the abduction. Just hours after that clip went live, later that same evening, things took another turn. At least 3 Pima County deputies pulled up to Annie Guthrie and Tommaso Cioni's place, parking 3 plain cars in the drive. The lights went down inside and the blinds were pulled tight. Reporters watching from the curb saw steady, bright flashes popping behind the windows, looking exactly like crime scene photos being taken. Then came a huge clue. An officer was snapped, leaving with a white hard-shell Pelican case, the type used to haul forensic gear, which he had brought in earlier. Except when he came out this time, he was also clutching a brown paper sack. Former CIA and FBI agent Tracy Walder broke down that specific combo for People magazine without blinking. The white box means processing gear, and the brown bag means collected evidence, which is standard forensic procedure. CBS News cited 2 different insiders that night who claimed the search was actually yielding some solid leads. Investigators were mainly interested in the home's garage. That is the same garage located 4 miles from Nancy's house that Cioni allegedly used on the night of January 31st. Deputies stayed in there for roughly 2.5 to 3 hours, according to the press crews watching from the street. The final officer cleared out right after 10:30 at night. Someone tossed an evidence bag into the rear of a cruiser. As the cruisers drove off, the Pima County Sheriff's Department stuck to their original story for the evening. They hadn't named a single person of interest. You need to follow exactly what went down after that, since the final report completely skipped this part. On February 10th, exactly 3 days post-search, the sheriff's office put out a release stating they would keep working the Guthrie properties all night long and straight into tomorrow. They weren't packing up, they weren't finishing, they were digging in. The wording was aggressive and focused on what came next. They dropped that update 6 days before clearing the family's name. So how does that specific timeline look to an outside forensic expert? First, a reporter's insider fingers a specific guy. Then the sheriff publicly shuts it down. You watch detectives zeroing in on that guy's house instead of backing off, spending hours searching with permission, hauling out proof, and promising to keep at it. Then there is a 6-day silence between that promise and the exoneration. During that nearly week-long window, the findings from whatever they seize, whatever the lab analysis actually turned up, and whatever those detectives discovered or missed in the garage Nobody has said a word about it. Then on February 16th, they dropped a crystal clear dismissal. The whole family and their partners were off the hook, yet nobody explained why. The announcement ignored the evidence they took. It said nothing about the forensic results. It failed to clarify if the items from that 3-hour sweep were even tested or ruled out as useless. They gave us the verdict, but hid the evidence. In fields like science, news, or court, an answer without the math isn't proof. It is just a statement. There is also a detail that has received almost no public attention, but belongs in this documented record anyway. While detectives were hitting Annie and Sion's place for that voluntary look-see on February 7th, they also doubled back to the main house that weekend where people snapped photos of them checking the backyard septic tank. Nobody ever explained why they focused so hard on that specific spot. When cops pop a septic lid during a kidnapping case, they are hunting for very specific biological traces. The fact that this went down the exact same weekend as the 3-hour toss of the other house, and just days before they promised to keep digging, adds a twist to the story that the authorities ignored. That is where this channel steps in. I am going to lay out every piece of the record for you. The fact they agreed to the search is huge. Sion and Annie let the cops in without a warrant, which shows they were playing ball. It is on paper, it is clear, and it counts. Folks hiding a dirty secret usually don't toss their garage keys to detectives and chill while a forensic squad tears the place apart for 3 hours. That is a solid fact you have to respect. However, playing nice and getting cleared doesn't solve the evidence puzzle. Those are two different beasts. You can be totally helpful while people still wonder what the cops found during that helpfulness. And regarding those loose ends, specifically what was in the garage and what the lab test from February 7th revealed, nobody has ever answered that. What does the clock say in your neck of the woods? Let me know down in the comments section. We have got viewers tracking this case globally around the clock. This investigation never rests, and this community stays awake right with it. The timeline running from February 3rd to February 16th spans exactly 13 days. That is 13 days from when Banfield called out Sion to when the family walked free. During that stretch, cops zeroed in on him and tossed his house, swept his garage for clues, and vowed to keep working his land, only to clear him later without saying what that work turned up. That isn't some wild theory. It is just the cold, hard timeline. And the facts of a criminal case don't just vanish into thin air because someone types up a press release. We have got 4 main points to consider. First, the last verified person to see Nancy breathing. Second, the vehicle that sat in police custody for weeks. Third, that 3-hour raid and everything that happened around it. And finally, something the police report completely ignored regarding the security cameras. Exactly. Because the person who cut those feeds didn't just spot one lens, they knew the location of every single one. There is one specific thing most folks missed when that doorbell video first hit the web. To say the camera was merely disabled the night Nancy was taken is to completely downplay the reality of the situation. It makes the whole thing sound passive and mechanical, like some random technical malfunction. But the forensic record tells a story that is far more deliberate and reveals much more about who was standing on that porch. The Google Nest doorbell at the front entrance was physically disconnected from its power source at 1:47 a.m. on February 1st. That second-generation device has a small flash memory failsafe, unlike older models, so it didn't fully lose power when the wire was cut. It immediately switched over to local storage mode, meaning the footage was not destroyed. It was pushed to a deletion queue in Google's back-end servers, just sitting there in the residual data. It was waiting to be overwritten, and the perpetrator didn't know that. They thought they had eliminated the record. They were wrong. And that single error is the most critical mistake in this case because it gave investigators their clearest visual evidence. Here is what that specific action tells us about the person who took it. Disconnecting a Nest doorbell from its power source is absolutely not a reflex action. You don't accidentally reach up and unplug a doorbell camera from the wall while just passing by in the dark. You have to know where the power source is and make a deliberate decision to approach it and physically remove it from operation. That shows intent, premeditation, and intimate knowledge of the property. Now layer the next detail on top of that. Ashley Banfield's law enforcement source didn't say just one camera was compromised. The source stated that cameras, plural, were disabled at multiple locations across the property, not just at the front door. The suspect moved through the perimeter of Nancy Guthrie's home in the early morning hours and hit every security point they knew about. That is not the behavior of someone who just stumbled onto a target of opportunity. That is reconnaissance in action, a floor plan executed under pressure at 2 in the morning by someone who had already done the mapping. There are only 3 categories of people who could possess that specific knowledge of Nancy's security layout. First, you have someone who has been inside the residence multiple times and observed the camera placements during regular visits. We are talking about family, close friends, or regular guests. Second, someone who conducted deliberate surveillance from the outside, mapping each camera position over multiple approaches. Third, someone who received direct information about the layout from a person intimately familiar with the home. Now, set that framework against what Fox News confirmed back in late February. This is a detail that should have dominated every news cycle, but received only a fraction of the coverage it deserved. One of the doorbell images released by the FBI was captured on a different day than the others, not the morning of February 1st. It was from an earlier date. A source with direct knowledge confirmed to Fox News Digital that the suspect visited Nancy's entrance before she was taken. It was a separate visit and a completely separate approach. CNN independently confirmed this, reporting that the suspect wasn't wearing the backpack in one image, indicating a different preparation state. The sheriff pushed back against this. He stated there were no timestamps on the images and that any suggestion of a prior visit was purely speculative. But the sourcing on both sides is documented, so we have to ask what a prior visit means forensically. It means the individual on that porch had been there before, not to take Nancy, but to look and assess. They were there to identify the security infrastructure and establish the exact approach for the night they were planning. Former senior FBI profiler Mary Ellen O'Toole analyzed the footage and was very specific in her assessment. She described the suspect's behavior not as evidence of incompetence, but as the exact opposite. Look at the moment the suspect tried to cover the lens with a gloved hand, paused, and then stepped back. They retrieved plant material from the garden and used it as secondary concealment. That was not panic. That was a person who hit a minor setback and corrected course under pressure without breaking their operational rhythm. O'Toole said it was rare to catch a well-planned offender on camera in the moments before their crime. That rarity speaks to the level of planning, which is why investigators asked residents to check their security systems for all of January. They didn't just want the night of the 31st or the hours around the disappearance. They wanted the entire month. Pima County Sheriff's investigators were also specifically focused on the night of January 11th. That was exactly 3 weeks before the removal. Authorities have never clarified the significance of that date publicly. What makes January 11th stand out? What exactly did the security cameras in the vicinity capture during those hours? We still have zero official word on that matter. However, when detectives ask residents to review footage from 30 days prior, they aren't just taking shots in the dark. There is a method to their madness. They are working to piece together a very precise sequence of events. Plus, they are scrutinizing a detail that flew under the radar: the firearm holster. Even the sheriff touched on this subject during his media briefing, noting that the rig worn by the masked individual possessed some incredibly distinct features. Detectives canvassed firearms dealers throughout Tucson, hunting for the brand and the transaction history. A piece of gear like that, with such specific markings, creates a paper trail. It is much easier to track down than some standard backpack and far more recognizable than a balaclava. If agents can link that gear to a stock-keeping unit and then to a receipt, the list of suspects shrinks drastically. Law enforcement is tugging hard on that string. Let's shift to the suspect's build. On February 12th, the Bureau put out their official alert. They described a male standing 5'9" to 5'10", medium frame, with a dark mustache peeking out from the disguise. That summary is intentionally wide-ranging, mainly because the lab is analyzing clips salvaged from ghost data on servers after being queued for erasure. The quality is far from high definition. This is salvaged digital evidence. The agents pulled what they could. Tommaso's precise stature hasn't been verified in any released report. Here is what we know for a fact. The Bureau's profile of 5'9" to 5'10" with a regular build applies to millions of guys across the country. Without more granular details, that profile fails to rule anybody out. Officials have stayed silent on whether they measured Tion's physical stats against that federal profile before clearing him, or if that check flagged a match or a miss. They went ahead and cleared him. No one clarified the biometric comparison. But another confirmed detail adds a crucial layer to the surveillance mystery, revealing that a strange car was lurking near the residence roughly 20 days before she vanished. Police spotted it on local security feeds and were hunting for it by the middle of February. That specific car lingering in the area weeks ahead of the abduction, coupled with the record of an earlier approach to the door, along with the calculated shutoff of security systems and that unique weapon rig, paints a clear portrait of a crime plotted long before February 1st. This was no accident. To pull that off, you need inside information. That intel demands access, whether physical or digital. And right where those hard truths meet lies the name of the man standing on that deck. It wasn't just a matter of the feeds going dark. Someone systematically took them out in the shadows, knowing exactly where they were mounted. Now, let's talk about the genetic evidence that supposedly clears the family. The scientific truth of what those samples prove and what they fail to prove flips the script on everything we assume about this case. Most observers think this is the part of the story where the family is officially off the hook. The lab results arrived, the relatives were exonerated. Case closed by science. Shut the book, walk away. But that isn't what the actual lab report says, not by a long shot. Let's break down the reality and why the gap between the press release and the lab bench matters more here than ever. When police rolled up to the residence on February 1st, they didn't find one pristine genetic sample from a lone donor. What the lab techs pulled from the scene was a complex genetic cocktail, a blend of biological markers from multiple people stacked on top of each other. The sheriff went on record confirming this detail on February 19th, stating to NBC News that the foreign traces in the house were a blend. Cece Moore, the lead genetic expert at Parabon Nanolabs, she represents one of the most prestigious forensic testing firms in the nation. This is the same outfit that used their tech to track down Brian Kohberger in the Idaho case, and she weighed in on that finding. She noted that blended profiles are standard when a struggle occurs. She didn't call it a mistake. She didn't dismiss it as background noise. She said it is expected in this type of scenario. That one word, common, carries a massive amount of weight in her statement. You see, it completely alters the context of every claim made about the genetics up to that point. This brings us to the glove, which demands a closer look because the story's spin regarding that item is arguably the most distorted part of this whole case. About 2.5 miles down the road from Nancy's place, detectives stumbled upon a discarded glove. This wasn't some random winter mitten either. The FBI stated this item looked visually identical to the gear the masked intruder wore on the doorbell video. Initial lab results identified a genetic profile belonging to an unknown male, which was immediately run through CODIS, the national DNA database. That system holds the genetic markers for convicted felons and arrestees across participating states, but the search came back empty. That is when the sheriff's department released a statement that totally baffled the public and has been twisted by the media ever since. They clarified that the glove's biological material didn't match anyone in the federal system, and separately, it didn't match the DNA recovered inside the house. You are looking at two distinct negative results from two completely separate samples. Here is the crucial forensic detail that barely any news outlet reported correctly. The genetic profile from the glove did not match the trace evidence found inside the residence, meaning the police weren't hunting for just one unknown source. They were dealing with at least two distinct subjects: the masked figure caught on the porch camera, plus whatever individual left that biological material inside Nancy's home. Whether those profiles come from the same guy or two different people remains a mystery to the public. Then we got the major update that should have completely flipped the narrative regarding that glove. By the beginning of March 2026, both NewsNation and CBS independently verified that the owner of that glove had been identified. It didn't belong to the man in the mask, and it certainly wasn't linked to anyone associated with the murder investigation. It belonged to a kitchen employee from a local restaurant nearby, someone with zero ties to Nancy Guthrie, no motive, and no reason to be involved. That glove had absolutely no investigative value. It was just trash tossed on the side of the road. Authorities picked it up, processed it, ran it through the databases, and got 0 hits. They even wasted time chasing it down with genetic genealogy before realizing it was a total dead end. You have to grasp how much this impacts the case. The very item the FBI claimed was a visual match for the killer's gear. The evidence that fueled days of breaking news and speculation about a DNA breakthrough had absolutely nothing to do with the crime. In the sheriff's own words, it was. Just one of roughly 16 gloves collected in the area, and most of those were actually dropped by the search teams working the terrain. That piece of clothing found 2 miles away was never the smoking gun people thought it was. It was a distraction from the start, and now that its profile is resolved, we know the only biological evidence that matters is currently sitting in a lab. I am talking about the mixed genetic profile lifted from inside Nancy's house. The sample that the sheriff hinted might actually belong to our perpetrator. That mixture needs to be carefully separated and decoded before they can check it against any suspect or database. Sheriff Nanos didn't mince words when he addressed this point. He stated investigators think the suspect's DNA might be in that house. He specifically used the word may, acknowledging the lab work wasn't done, but he added a detail that slipped past most reporters. He insisted that the biological evidence from the crime scene was far more significant than some random glove found miles down the road. This brings us to the core question regarding the sheriff's claim that the DNA didn't match any of the Guthrie family members. What was the actual intent behind that comment? Because on the surface, it sounds like a total biological clearance. However, from a forensic perspective, that phrase could describe 2 entirely different situations with vastly different levels of certainty. Let's look at the first scenario. Detectives obtained a direct reference sample, like a cheek swab, from Tommaso Cioni. They sent that sample to the lab, compared it directly against the crime scene evidence, and found no link. That would be a definitive exclusion. If they physically compared Cioni's genetic markers to the material in Nancy's home and found they were different, then he is scientifically ruled out as the person who left that trace evidence at the scene. That is hard science. That is a closed book. Now consider the second scenario. Investigators ran the unknown profile through CODIS and got 0 hits. Then they announced the family was clear simply because none of them have a criminal history that would put them in that system. That method tells us absolutely nothing about people who aren't already in the database. If you have no prior arrests or convictions, your genetic profile isn't sitting in CODIS. Cioni has a clean record. His DNA wouldn't be in the system, so a lack of a match there doesn't clear him at all. All it proves is that he hasn't been booked by the feds or state police in the past. The Pima County Sheriff's Department still hasn't clarified which of these 2 methods they used to clear the family. They brought up CODIS and the fact that there wasn't a match. They never publicly confirmed if Sion's genetic profile was actually compared to the mixed DNA sample found inside NY's home. That specific distinction is the biggest forensic question mark in this whole case, and it remains unaddressed. There is one more piece to the puzzle. An internet search made right before NY vanished. Someone Googled Nancy Guthrie's home address and Savannah Guthrie's salary, a fact that Fox News has verified. Nobody has explained the timing of that search, and we still don't know if detectives identified the device that was used to run those queries or linked it back to a specific person, because that info hasn't been released. But let's be honest, a pre-crime internet search for a victim's home address is not just a random detail. It belongs on the record because it points directly to the same issue raised by the security camera footage. It brings up questions of prior knowledge, targeting, and planning. Meanwhile, the DNA from NY's home is being processed. A private lab down in Florida received samples from the Pima County Sheriff's Department to run their analysis. This is running on a completely separate track from the testing at the FBI lab in Quantico. They are using investigative genetic genealogy through Parabon Nanolabs, the same company that linked Brian Kohberger to the Idaho murders using just a partial DNA profile and a family tree. Cece Moore has gone on record stating she is 100% confident that genetic genealogy will eventually identify who that DNA belongs to. She made it clear that it is not a question of possibility, but simply a matter of time. Time matters, especially in a case where every forensic lead, the cameras, the backpack, the holster, has taken way longer to solve than anyone wanted. The ransom notes, the searches, and the clearances. The DNA found in that house might be the one piece of evidence that can't be disputed. It can't be written off as a coincidence, and it certainly can't be spun by a statement at a press conference. It is black and white. It either matches or it doesn't, and that result is on its way. When that drops, it's going to answer more questions than every public statement released since February 1st combined. There is another layer to this investigation that DNA evidence hasn't fixed and can't fix by itself: a senior law enforcement source. We are talking about someone with direct access to forensic results, witness statements, and surveillance analysis. This insider, who knows how the evidence is being processed, publicly stated through a veteran journalist that Tommaso Cioni might be the prime suspect. Even after that clearance was issued, that source never wavered from their original position. Not one single time. Not after the sheriff's statement, not after the public clearance, and not after any updates since, which begs the question of why. Why would a source with full access look at that clearance and refuse to budge? That is the final detail in this case that remains unanswered. In the world of investigative journalism, a source taking back their story isn't just a minor footnote. It is a seismic event because it means the intel was wrong, the source made a mistake, or the situation changed so much that the original take no longer applies. However, when you have a senior law enforcement source, someone with proven access to an active federal investigation who makes a public claim through a respected journalist, and then they sit back and watch an official clearance get issued, they have two choices: update their stance or stand by it. Ashley Banfield's source chose the second option every single day. On February 3rd, 2026, Banfield reported on her podcast, Drop Dead Serious, that a highly connected law enforcement source, a person with impeccable credentials and direct knowledge of the investigation, told her that Tommaso Cioni could be the prime suspect in Nancy Guthrie's disappearance. She was careful with her wording, acknowledging that families are always looked at first, explicitly stating these were musings rather than hard evidence, but the source was real. The intel was specific and the name was out there, yet the Pima County Sheriff's Department denied it. Sheriff Nanos called the report reckless during a press conference on February 5th. The department told TMZ they had no idea where the report came from, leaving two conflicting positions in public view, with neither side yielding. On February 12th, Banfield appeared on SiriusXM with Mediaite founder Dan Abrams. Abrams pressed her directly for any updates or changes to the story, and Banfield's response was precise. She said her source has stood by that initial report every single day since it broke. She noted that the thinking hadn't shifted since the day Nancy was reported missing, and then she added something that hasn't been properly examined in the media. She said her source told her that following the initial broadcast, after the report went public and Sion's name entered the national conversation, the internal scrutiny of the investigation actually tightened. It didn't loosen, it tightened. The public exposure didn't make investigators back off from the person they were looking at. The insider claims the investigation actually moved in the reverse direction. Let's take a second to really let that sink in. We are talking about a top-tier police authority who sees the raw lab data firsthand. This person viewed the cyber trails, camera footage, and witness statements, then saw their private take hit the headlines. They observed the department issue a formal rejection right after. They witnessed the media storm explode and subsequently informed the reporter that the detectives were actually doubling down instead of looking elsewhere. You do not act that way if you messed up and are just trying to cover your tracks. That is how someone acts when they know they are right and see the case unfolding exactly as they predicted. On her February 12th broadcast, Banfield pointed out that third parties had verified multiple specifics from her initial scoop. Various news agencies proved that the truck was indeed hauled off and impounded for processing. Reporters at Fox News Digital found out on their own about tiny shards of glass found under the forward section. That debris suggests the recording device was smashed by force instead of just being unscrewed or detached. She highlighted these proofs not to confirm the insider's theory regarding Sion's guilt. Instead, she used them to prove her contact's credibility. If someone knows about the impound and the broken lens before anyone else, They clearly have legit access. Now, regarding the allegation about Scion being a suspect, nobody else verified it, yet nobody debunked it either. No other leaker spoke up, and no reporter with police contacts contradicted it. The only rejection of that claim came from the public relations team at the sheriff's department. That insider with the badge never budged an inch. Think about the description of this individual provided by the anchor. We are not dealing with a beat cop or a press secretary, but a high-level commander. Someone with enough stripes to sit in the strategy meetings and handle the custody logs. An officer privy to lab analysis discussions long before the press release is drafted. This is the type of figure who understands not only the discoveries, but also the current targets and the logic behind them. When this individual says the word prime, they are basing it on hard proof, not rumors or news articles. Their knowledge comes directly from the case dossier. Plus, there is a massive issue that everyone seems to be ignoring. Suppose her contact made a mistake and misinterpreted the initial police work before the lab test cleared things up. Why did they fail to circle back and admit their error once the police cleared the man? Informants usually fix their mistakes, particularly the high-ranking ones who value their reputation. Any leaker who honestly messed up and saw the department publicly clear, the guy had an easy out. Just ring the reporter, explain the shift, and set the story straight. However, that never occurred. Even the host herself verified that no retraction was ever offered. Her contact defended every single part of the initial story, including the truck, the lens shards, and the suspect theory, without changing a word. We need to be crystal clear about what this fact actually proves and what it leaves open. This does not prove Tommaso Cian had a hand in the woman vanishing, nor does it nullify the police statement clearing him. It does not lead to handcuffs, a prosecution, or a guilty verdict. Here is what it actually demonstrates. A top police brass with full clearance decided a certain person was involved and held on to that view despite the public denial and ongoing lab work. That official stuck to their guns for over 4 weeks while the detectives kept working. That is an established reality currently existing in the open domain. Nobody has ever offered a reason for it. The formal press release ignored it, and no other equal-ranking officer has disputed it. Remember, being cleared is not the same as a court judgment. It is simply a snapshot decision made during a live case, relying only on what they knew at that specific moment. Proof evolves. Inquiries are always in motion. The advanced DNA testing on the genetic cocktail found in her house is still unfinished. Also, they are still tracking the gun holster. That strange car seen 3 weeks earlier remains a mystery to the public. We also still have no idea what they found during that 3-hour voluntary sweep. All a clearance really means is that right now, with what we have, we are not looking at this guy. Here is what that statement does not guarantee: that the facts are frozen forever, that the lab work is done and nothing new will ever change their mind. If there is a single query resting at the very heart of this mystery, one issue that those 7 proven facts, the forensic proof, the investigative conduct, and the one source who never changed their story all point to this single conclusion: what exactly did that insider see during the investigation that every public statement since February 16th has refused to address? We still don't have an answer to that question. You won't find it in the clearance papers, the press conferences, or any document currently available to the public. And we won't get an answer until the forensic analysis in 2 separate labs yields a result that either confirms or rules out the connection that source has insisted on from day one. Until that happens, those 7 details remain exactly where they always have. They are documented, verified, and completely unresolved. Every case needs to be looked at from both sides, not just as a formality or a disclaimer tacked on to meet a legal standard, but as a true forensic duty. Because if those 7 recorded details raise a credible set of questions, then the evidence on the other side deserves the same weight, the same precision, and the same honest analysis. That is exactly what this chapter is about. Let's start with the most important piece of counter evidence: the Puma County Sheriff's Department, the lead agency on this case with the best access to the forensic results, the surveillance review, and the witness statements, along with the evidence found during the 3-hour consented search, issued a public clearance on February 16th, 2026. The statement was specific. To be clear, the Guthrie family, including all siblings and spouses, has been cleared as possible suspects without any hedging or qualifications. The family has been nothing but cooperative and gracious, and they are considered victims in this case. That is the official position of the agency leading this investigation. It is documented, it is authoritative, and it has never been formally retracted or changed. 2 weeks prior to that clearance, on February 14th, ABC News reported that sources briefed on the investigation said detectives were leaning away from the Guthrie family as suspects. This wasn't a public announcement. It was reporting sourced from inside the investigation that came out before the official clearance was issued. It means the shift away from the family wasn't a sudden administrative decision. It was a gradual, evidence-driven move that multiple sources with access to the investigation witnessed and reported. That matters because it means the clearance reflected a process, not just a press conference. Also, consider what the family actually did, not what was rumored about them, but what is documented in the public record. Annie and Sion agreed to the search on February 7th without making investigators get a warrant. They opened their home. They opened their garage and gave investigators nearly 3 hours of unrestricted access to their property, then went right back to cooperating with the investigation the next day. That is not the behavior of people who have something to hide. Defense attorneys in high-profile criminal cases tell their clients never to consent to a warrantless search. Never. The legal standard exists for a reason. Annie and Sion waived it voluntarily. The family posted a $1 million cash reward, offered anonymously with no questions asked for any information leading to Nancy's recovery. $1 million. Not as a media stunt, but as a documented financial commitment. That is the kind of money people put up when finding someone matters more than the cost. Savannah, from her NBC desk and on her personal Instagram, spoke directly to whoever was holding her mother. She wasn't performing grief for the cameras. She sent out a plea. She said it was never too late to do the right thing. That is the language of a daughter who believed, or needed to believe, that her mother could still come home. Now, consider the other leads investigators were actively chasing at the same time, because the idea that the family was the only focus doesn't match the record. On February 10th, WFBI Director Kash Patel visited the Tucson Command Center personally and stated publicly that agents were looking at more than one person. He meant an individual of interest, not just one direction, but multiple. That same evening, a delivery driver identified as Carlos Palas was pulled over during a traffic stop about 60 miles south of Tucson in Rio Rico near the Mexican border. Investigators executed a court-authorized search warrant on his home. The basis for the stop was an anonymous tip after the FBI released doorbell footage and claimed he looked like the suspect. Palazuelos cooperated. He was released without charges the following morning. He told reporters he had never met Nancy Guthrie and had no involvement in her disappearance. Investigators confirmed they completed their search of his property and moved on. 3 days later, on February 13th, a second individual was detained and his home searched. Luke Daly, 37, a convicted felon living approximately 2 miles from Nancy's residence. His lawyer, Chris Salepi, confirmed that both Daly and his mother were detained. Law enforcement searched their home, yet neither one was arrested. Salepi confirmed they had zero ties to Guthrie. Detectives swept the property and let them go, meaning 2 detentions and 2 searches ended with no charges filed. That steered the probe completely away from the Guthrie family, but we also need to talk about Dominic Evans. It is a detail that has garnered almost no media attention aside from a lonely mention in the New York Times. But it belongs in any honest retelling of this case, since Evans is a drummer who plays in a band with Tommaso Cioni. In the weeks after Nancy vanished, a swarm of internet sleuths appeared online. These people, who operate on screenshots and hunches instead of facts, targeted Evans as a suspect, and his family got threats. His life was turned upside down even though he was innocent. Evans is not just a footnote, he is a prime example. He represents what happens when valid case questions get churned through sites that lack investigative ethics and accountability. The sheriff slammed the online rumors targeting the Guthrie clan, calling the speculation both cruel and dead wrong. Seeing Evans and his folks go through that same hell proved the damage is tangible and standards actually mean something. And then you have the ransom hoax. On February 21st, 2026, federal agents charged a 42-year-old Californian named Derek Kayla with fraud. He sent a fake demand straight to Annie and Sion's phones, claiming he knew where Nancy was and wanting a payout. The Bureau tracked that digital signal back to Kala in a matter of days. He was picked up and slapped with federal charges for extortion and fraud. He had no link to the abduction, just a predator trying to squeeze cash from a grieving family. The feds moved on him fast. That arrest highlighted the massive federal assets deployed here and the sheer level of investigative focus. It showed the high-tech scrutiny applied to every single tip, whether it was the real deal or just noise. This is the landscape you see when you stop focusing on one loose thread and look at the whole picture. The family helped out at every turn. They consented to searches and put up their own money for a reward. They stayed open with the public, and authorities cleared them after extensive forensics, surveillance reviews, and interviews. Police chased down several other leads at the same time. They checked everyone from a delivery driver near the Mexican border to a felon living 2 miles away. That fake ransom text got traced, and the guy got prosecuted in just a few weeks. It proved how seriously they took the forensics, and sources say the probe was already moving away from the family. Insiders told ABC News that detectives were looking elsewhere long before they officially cleared the relatives. That is the verified flip side, and it needs to be weighed just as heavily as those other 7 points. Consider if Tommaso Cioni truly had no involvement in what happened to Nancy Guthrie. If those 7 details are just bad timing and police protocol, then his suffering is significant. A reporter dragged his name into the spotlight on day 3, and his house got tossed. They went through his garage, impounded his car, and millions of people judged him based on fragments of truth. His bandmate got death threats, which is a very real price to pay. If the evidence clears him completely, that collateral damage needs to be logged in the history books too. 2 things can be true at once. The family can be innocent, and the questions can still matter. The police clearance can be solid, while the reporting on those gaps remains good journalism. One side does not cancel out the other. Both belong on the record, and both are present here. What remains, 33 days after Nancy was taken, is a conclusion that has not landed yet. The lab is still processing that mixed DNA sample from her house, and the holster tests are ongoing. Genetic genealogy is still running, and the answer that bridges the gap between the story and the facts is hiding in that data. The answers are on the way. The only doubt is whether we find Nancy Guthrie before they get here. It has been 33 days since the door shut at 9. 50 that night on January 31st, 2026, when the world Nancy built over 84 years went quiet. No cuffs, no sign of life, and no bridge between the official word and the documented evidence. Just the empty desert, the lingering questions, and a family waiting outside their mom's house on March 2nd. Savannah, Oani, and Tommaso Cioni are placing yellow blossoms on a roadside shrine that keeps expanding by the hour. It is a trio bound together by public sorrow, while far away in a private Florida lab and deep inside the Bureau's Quantico Nerve Center. High-tech equipment is currently churning through biological samples that might just finish the puzzle. This could finally resolve the mystery haunting everyone since the 1st of February, so let's line up all 7 key facts right here. We aren't here to guess or assign guilt, but to lay out the hard evidence as it exists. The last man to see her breathing dropped her off, saw the garage shut, and left. Yet his whereabouts for that critical 41-minute gap from 1:47 to 2:28 in the morning remain a total mystery to the public, while his car sat in an impound lot for weeks, even after police said he was in the clear. The owner eventually got the ride back, but nobody ever said what the lab techs found inside. Detectives spent 3 hours tossing his house with his permission and walked out hauling bags of potential proof. They vowed to keep working the scene for days, only to clear him 6 days later with zero explanation of what was in those bags. Whoever took Nancy while wearing that mask knew exactly where the lens angles were and shut them down one by one. That level of awareness strongly suggests an intruder who already knew the floor plan by heart. The federal description of our suspect is so generic that it neither rules this guy out nor pins it on him explicitly. When they mention DNA evidence clearing the family, they fail to clarify the crucial difference. Is it a direct swab comparison or just a database run that stays silent on anyone who hasn't been arrested before? Plus, a high-ranking insider close to the case flagged this man as the likely top suspect on day 3 and hasn't wavered since, regardless of official statement. That makes 7 distinct points, and every single one is backed by hard documentation. You can find every item sitting right there in the open files at this very moment. The statement clearing him ignored all of it. So let's look at exactly where the probe sits today. It is March 5th, 2026, and federal agents were back in the Catalina foothills this morning, knocking on doors again. Authorities have officially signed off on a fresh joint task force operation. A sergeant and 4 homicide detectives from the Pima County Sheriff's Office have moved to the FBI building in Tucson to work exclusively on this file. Prior to this shift, almost every badge in the county department had touched this investigation at one time or another. That approach just isn't feasible for an agency responsible for protecting a whole region. This new structure cuts down the headcount, but it leaves behind only the most elite minds. We are talking about veteran investigators embedded in the federal system with tools a local sheriff could never access alone. Do not mistake this for a cold case. It is a strategic pivot designed for the long haul. Sheriff Nanos spoke to the press this week and dropped a very telling phrase about being definitely closer. He didn't say maybe or hopefully, he said definitely, adding that he has total confidence they will crack this. He also stated his personal conviction that Nancy Guthrie is still out there breathing. That is the language of a boss who has seen evidence we haven't seen, and he is choosing his words wisely on national TV. We also have confirmation as of March 4th regarding a specific item that detectives are calling the missing link. It comes down to the suspect's mobile device. Nanos verified that tower pings have already ruled people out and highlighted new leads. He also admitted there is a massive chunk of that digital record that still hasn't been completely decoded. An active phone in the Catalina foothills during that time frame would pinpoint the user's location with exact precision rather than a vague guess. Merging tower triangulation with carrier history logs can lock down a device's spot within just a few meters. Assuming that digital footprint exists, which the detectives seem sure it does, it represents the type of hard proof you can't talk your way out of or dismiss as a random fluke. In the meantime, the Bureau has stacked up roughly 10,000 hours of video from the area. We're talking about everything from doorbell cams and home security units to business surveillance and dashboard recorders. Analysts are combing through those 10,000 hours frame by frame, using enhancement software to clean up the blurry clips. One local doorbell camera caught a car tearing through the neighborhood right around 2 in the morning. It was 30 minutes past 2 on February 1st, exactly 6 minutes after the victim's pacemaker stopped, and they are tearing that video apart right now. Every single forensic lead they chased in this mess just created more riddles, except for one thing. That glove turned out to belong to a harmless restaurant employee working across the street. All the other leads are still wide open, with that complex DNA sample from the house currently undergoing advanced testing despite the contamination issues. Detectives are still hunting down the origins of that gun holster at every firearm dealer in the Tucson region. Analysts are still crunching the cell tower logs while investigators chase down that backpack through Walmart receipts and online resale listings. That suspicious car, spotted on camera 20 days before she vanished, has been identified and is currently being tracked down. Major networks like Fox and CNN verified the earlier porch visit, though the sheriff's office disputes it, claiming the digital timestamps don't add up. These aren't cold cases, they are burning hot leads. And solving just one could crack this entire mystery wide open. Now let's tackle the 5 major questions that officials have dodged and no press release has ever explained. Where is the rock-solid proof verifying the alibi for that critical 41-minute window? What exactly did investigators find during that 3-hour consensual sweep of the garage? Did the lab run a direct comparison between a specific suspect and the mixed genetic profile found inside the residence? Or was that person cleared based on a generic database scan that wouldn't flag anyone without a rap sheet? Does the description of the last person to see Nancy alive actually match the forensic profile built by the FBI? Why does a high-ranking investigator stick to their initial theory even after the suspect was publicly cleared? These queries aren't just wild guesses, they are the logical next steps based on the case files. They have been staring us in the face since February without a single answer, and that needs to change immediately. There is one more piece of this puzzle. On day 24, Savannah Guthrie dropped a video that froze the nation. She marked the 24th day since their mom was snatched in the night, calling every passing second pure torture. She told the world that the family was still holding out for a miracle to happen. Then she shifted gears and spoke the words no daughter should ever have to voice. She admitted her mother might be gone, possibly already home with the Lord she worshiped. Next came a statement that hits differently now, especially after everything we have broken down over these 10 chapters. She said, if you have been on the fence, let this be your signal to step up and spill what you know. Help us bring our mom back. She wasn't talking to the crowd. She was talking to someone specific. She was addressing the person holding the secrets, weighing the risk of silence against the guilt of knowing the truth. Savannah is a pro. She knows the distinction between a broad request and a targeted message. With over 20 years in the news game, she picked those words with surgical precision. If you are watching this right now and sitting on intel about Nancy's fate, she depended on daily care and could not have walked into the desert alone. Every detail at the scene pointed to someone else making the decision to take her. At 1:47 inches the morning, someone deliberately cut the power to her front doorbell camera. They knew exactly where it was mounted. By 2:28 a.m., her pacemaker went silent. In that 4-1-minute window, an 4-year-old woman was removed from her home by a masked, armed, and fully prepared intruder. Asterisk, asterisk. Predators rely on silence, isolation, and the assumption that no one is watching. Community vigilance can close the gaps they depend on. Asterisk, asterisk. The intruder disabled multiple cameras across the property before entering. This was not a random crime. It required knowledge, planning, and at least one prior visit to scout the layout. A church prayer group member noticed Nancy was absent from their Sunday morning virtual service. That single act of attention set the entire investigation in motion. Check on your neighbors regularly, especially elderly individuals living alone. A missed call or an unanswered message can be the signal that changes everything. Know who has access to your home and your routines. Predators who plan ahead depend on insiders, patterns, and information shared carelessly over time. Invest in monitored home security with cloud backup. The doorbell camera at Nancy's home captured critical footage precisely because it stored data before being disconnected. If you see something that feels wrong, report it immediately. Neighbors who noticed a suspicious vehicle weeks before the abduction may have held a key piece of evidence. Support the investigation. The Pima County Sheriff and FBI are actively pursuing forensic leads. Tip lines and community awareness have already shaped the direction of this case. Nancy raised 3 remarkable children, including a decorated Air Force colonel, a nationally recognized broadcast anchor, and a poet and educator. She was the foundation that held them all together. After losing her husband at 49, she returned to work for 17 years to put her daughters through college. She gave everything for her family without hesitation. Her family has posted a $1 million reward for information leading to her safe return. Anonymous tips can be submitted to the Pima County Sheriff at 520-351-4900 or the FBI at 1-800-CALL-FBI. Nancy Guthrie built 84 years of love, sacrifice, and community. She deserves to come home. One tip from one person who knows the truth could bring her back. Nancy Guthrie, 84 years old, vanished from her own home in the middle of the night while the world slept unaware. She lived alone in the Catalina foothills north of Tucson, in a neighborhood so quiet and isolated that neighbors rarely hear anything after dark. Her pacemaker synced with her phone constantly. Her medications were still on the counter. Her phone never left the house.